On a recorded phone call, an Enron trader laughed as rolling blackouts cut power to millions of Californians. "We just turned off the lights," he said. He wasn't worried. He was celebrating. By December 2001, more than $60 billion would be gone. Not lost in a market crash, not erased by bad timing, deliberately hidden until hiding it became impossible. This is the story of how one of the most trusted companies in American history was built to deceive, and why almost no one stopped it. At its peak, Enron wasn't just successful, it was untouchable. The company presented itself as the future of capitalism, faster and smarter than anything before it. Investors didn't just see profits, they saw a system that seemed to rewrite the rules of business. Jeffrey Skilling pushed the idea relentlessly. Markets could price anything, he argued, and Enron would always be in the middle. Electricity, gas, bandwidth, even weather became products inside a machine few truly understood. Kenneth Lay made it feel safe. He spoke calmly, confidently, with the weight of political ties behind him. People trusted him, even when the business itself started to feel impossible to explain. By 2000, the stock traded near $90 per share. The company was valued above $70 billion, praised as America's most innovative firm. Even inside Enron, some executives quietly admitted they didn't fully understand how profits were generated. That was the first signal. Profits kept rising, but the cash behind them didn't follow at the same pace. Money wasn't behaving like it should, and nobody pushed hard enough to explain why. Because the story was working, and nobody wanted to be the one who broke it. Behind the narrative, something else was being built. Not growth, not efficiency, but a system designed to move problems out of sight. Losses didn't disappear. They were relocated into structures investors rarely examined closely. Andrew Fastow designed the mechanism. Special purpose entities, partnerships that held Enron's debt away from its official books. To investors, the company looked stable, even as hidden obligations continued to grow. Then it crossed a line. Fastow didn't just design these entities, he personally controlled many of them. The CFO of Enron was effectively negotiating with himself, extracting value from both sides of the deal. He made over $30 million personally while doing it. The board approved it, fully aware this wasn't standard practice. Arthur Andersen signed off on it, despite clear conflicts staring back at them. Everyone involved saw enough to question it, but not enough to stop the machine. Enron also pushed mark-to-market accounting to its limits. Future profits from long-term contracts were recorded immediately, often years before any cash existed. A deal signed today could generate millions in profit instantly, even if it failed tomorrow. The numbers looked structured, audited, and precise. They were built on assumptions no one outside the company could verify. Then came the structures tied entirely to Enron's own stock. Partnerships funded with Enron shares were used to absorb losses from Enron itself. If the stock price dropped, the entire system would collapse at the same time. How is that even stable? It wasn't. Inside the company, pressure made everything worse. Employees were ranked constantly, and the lowest performers were fired every year without exception. Survival depended on hitting targets, not understanding how those targets were achieved. Doubt became dangerous. People learned quickly that asking the wrong question could end their career overnight. So they stopped asking, and the system kept expanding without resistance. And then there was California. In 2000, during the energy crisis, traders exploited the system deliberately. They scheduled fake maintenance, restricted supply, and created artificial shortages across the grid. Entire regions lost power, while Enron traders joked about it on recorded calls. "We just turned off the lights," one of them laughed. Prices surged. Enron made money. and millions of people paid higher bills for a shortage that was never real. There were people who could have stopped this much earlier. They didn't. Arthur Andersen reviewed the structures repeatedly and approved them anyway. They earned millions in fees, auditing and consulting on the same system they were supposed to question. The conflict wasn't hidden, it was embedded directly into the relationship. Analysts followed Enron closely, but depended on access to management. The company was too complex to challenge without inside guidance, and access required cooperation. Those who pushed too hard risked being cut off completely. Then came a moment that should have changed everything. During an earnings call, an analyst questioned the financial disclosures. Jeffrey Skilling cut him off mid-sentence and mocked him publicly. He dismissed the concern, avoided the answer, and moved the call forward without hesitation. Nobody followed up. The call continued. The stock held, and the warning disappeared into the noise. Regulators saw filings, but not intent. The structures technically followed the rules, even as they distorted reality beyond recognition. Enron operated inside the system while quietly breaking what the system was meant to protect. By early 2001, the machine needed constant fuel. New deals were required to support old ones, and new entities to hide existing losses. The company wasn't generating value anymore. It was maintaining an illusion that required continuous input. In August, Skilling resigned abruptly. There was no clear explanation, just vague statements that didn't match the timing. Internally, it signaled something far more serious than anyone was willing to admit. Kenneth Lay stepped back in and reassured everyone. He told employees the company was strong, even as he sold millions of dollars in personal stock. What he said publicly and what he did privately no longer aligned. The stock began to fall. At first slowly, then faster, as hidden liabilities started to surface. Confidence didn't collapse instantly. It eroded until nothing was left to support it. Then the lock hit. Employees were locked into Enron stock inside their retirement plans. Some logged in every morning, watching the number shrink, hoping it would stop. It didn't stop, and there was nothing they could do about it. Executives had already exited. By November, the stock was nearly worthless, from $90 to under $1, wiping out over $60 billion in value. Liquidity vanished as banks pulled back and counterparties refused to engage. On December 2nd, 2001, Enron filed for bankruptcy. At that moment, it became the largest corporate failure in U.S. history. What looked like the future of business was revealed as one of its most elaborate deceptions. The damage wasn't abstract. Thousands lost jobs, pensions, and financial security within weeks. Retail investors absorbed billions in losses, trusting a system that failed them completely. Andrew Fastow was arrested and later sentenced to prison. He cooperated, explaining in detail how the structures were designed and approved internally. His testimony revealed how deeply the fraud was embedded across the company. Jeffrey Skilling was convicted after trial. He received a sentence exceeding 20 years, later reduced, but still substantial. He maintained for years that he believed in the model, even as it collapsed around him. Kenneth Lay was found guilty, but never sentenced. He died before the court could decide his punishment. For many victims, that felt less like justice and more like an escape. Arthur Andersen collapsed soon after. The firm was convicted for obstructing justice by destroying audit documents. Tens of thousands of employees lost their jobs because of decisions made at the top. Some people paid heavily. Others walked away with reputations damaged, but wealth largely intact. The system distributed consequences unevenly, just as it had distributed risk. After Enron, regulation tightened. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act imposed stricter controls on financial reporting. Executives became personally responsible for the accuracy of their statements. Oversight increased, and compliance became a central part of corporate operations. But rules don't eliminate behavior. They just change how it hides. Because Enron was never just about accounting. It was about people choosing belief over discomfort. At every level, someone saw something that didn't make sense. They paused, hesitated, and then chose not to push further. Not because they couldn't understand it, but because understanding had consequences. The fraud didn't succeed because it was perfectly hidden. It succeeded because it was collectively tolerated. Enron still matters for that reason. Because the pattern didn't end there. The numbers were engineered to look real. The belief made them powerful. And when belief finally broke, there was nothing underneath it. Because there never was.